Bart McEnroe, you're very welcome to the Bulletproof Dad podcast. How are you, sir?
I'm good, Andrew. Very good.
Bart, it's great to get you in. I've been at you for a while now to try and get you in here for many reasons. The first thing I'm conscious of is a lot of people may not recognize your name, but will be very, very familiar with the work that you've done. So if it's okay, I'm going to read a passage from a book that's an autobiography from Bernard Brogan, the Dublin footballer.
Okay.
That will give people a little bit of an insight. Do you know the passage I'm about to read?
I don't know. Go on.
Okay, so just to give people a bit of context as to the type of work Bart does, and we're going to get into a lot more of this as the podcast rolls. So in Bernard Brogan's autobiography, he recounts how Pat Gilroy punished himself for that loss, which was the 17-point heavy defeat against Kerry in 2009, a big turning point in Dublin GAA. He recruited a performance and business consultant called Bart McEnroe, who Brogan claims tore into Pat, saying he'd brought shame on his county and overseeing that disaster in Croker. You're only a novice, a bluffer, a choker. Your team can't tackle, you can't coach, you can't manage. He kept on abusing Pat and his team right until when they were nose to nose and Pat eventually slapped and pinned him against the wall. Okay. Bart just smiled. Pat looked at it and he said, Pat, look at yourself. You've allowed yourself to be emotionally hijacked again. Now, Bart, how does a fella from Meath, of all places, get away with that sort of carry on in the Dublin GAA setup?
Well, if that were true, which isn't, now things happen, but just not exactly like that. Okay, so a bit of artistic license there by Bernard, but how do you get away with that? Well, the only way you get away with that or something like that is that you come home with something better.
Yeah. Okay.
Because if you're going to pull a stroke like that, you have to have something good to back it up.
Big time. So look, what I will do is I'd love to take you back to the early years of Bart first of all, and we'll lead back up into this area because obviously there's a serious journey to get to somewhere like that.
I wasn't expecting to start with that. Thanks very much, Andrew.
Put you on the spot, I apologise.
That's okay, thanks a lot. But anyway, we might get you back later on in this conversation.
So look, you're a proud Meath man. Yeah, is that fair to say?
Pretty much from Meath, yeah.
Cool. So grew up in Meath, and I'd imagine GAA was a big part of your childhood growing up. Would that be fair?
It was because you worked on a farm. The old man bred Aberdeen Angus cattle. A lot of people know the family for that. So whether you were doing a bit of work on the farm, you're trying to mitch up the road on a bike, in my case, to get away, or you went to football because there was really nothing else on. Okay. So football was the thing, yeah.
Yeah, okay. So were you straight in from a kid when you were a couple of years old?
Oh, yeah, under 10, under 12, under 14, all that stuff. I had an older brother who was a fanatic about it, John. So I used to have to go along with him, and I was his practice buddy and his punch bag and a few other things.
Were you a willing practice buddy? Did you enjoy it?
Well, some of it, yeah. But a lot of the time he was just a much better footballer than me and much more courageous and all that stuff. So, but look at it, I was able to hold my own, I suppose. But I wouldn't say football really was my thing, but because I was very nervous or I wasn't confident around it and all that. But I got playing. We won an under-14 championship when we were young, and we won an intermediate championship when we got on a bit. So I suppose some people never won anything, so it was good to win those.
Some nice memories there. So you did play up to senior level, yeah? So
yeah, well, it was intermediate, but it would be adult level.
Yeah, very good. So like when that was all going on, tell us then, like, did you go do your leaving cert and did you get in then? Did you go to college?
Oh yeah, did the leaving cert. The mother, God rest her, wanted someone to go to college, and I pulled the short straw, so.
The chosen one, yeah?
Yeah, I went off to do agricultural science because I had an uncle done it years ago. But I never really practiced agricultural science, but I did. I went to college, I went to Galway, I went to UCD.
Right. So that's obviously very different to what you're doing now. So what was, after the degree, what was the next sort of step? I'm kind of keen to figure out where you're at currently there. You've gone to college, you've done your degree, agricultural science. Yeah. How have we led down this path to being in a Dublin GAA dressing room?
I met a lovely girl in the rugby club in Lansdowne Road, and she was going to nurse in London, and so I decided I'd go over to London and I'd started doing chippy and first and second fixing, and then get into construction because I was good with my hands. Like I had a degree, never used it really, but I went to London, started working in the buildings. It was good money then back in the 80s. So.
Good crack as well, I'd say, being a young Irish man over there.
It was grand, but sure, I was just working away, and I went back when I was in London after a while. I went back to college. I sort of got fed up. A friend of mine came back and he was doing an MBA, and he says, "Why don't you come with me and do this?" Because I had given him a start in the buildings, and I was sort of getting fed up with lads roaring and shouting at me, telling me what to do on the building site. So I went back and did a master's at that stage.
Was that in London or was that back in Dublin? Did you move home at the stage?
It was in London.
Okay, very good.
Yeah.
And were you playing GAA the whole time you were over there?
Yeah, I was, but I'd done my cruciate over there then,
Right.
and then that's when I finished it up, you know.
What age were you then when that happened?
Oh, gosh, don't ask me age. It's left me a
Okay,
card. It
okay.
doesn't work very well. 30.
Okay, right.
Yeah, around 30.
Okay, but that's the time you have to start seeing sense. Was that when because you're a father of 4?
Yeah.
Yeah. So were the kids on the scene at that stage? Did they start to come in?
No. Iris and I, we sort of, I think I'd done my knee in 86 or 87 after we won the championship. And then, I don't know, 92, 91, 92, 93, the kids started to come.
So just to be clear, was that championship in London or was that in
No,
Leeds?
it was in Harte. It was in Harte.
Were you flying over and back?
Yeah, a bit towards the end, yeah.
Yeah.
Which wasn't much fun, but anyway.
That's a lot of commitment though. So you obviously have some sort of a graph for it. Like if you're
Oh yeah, but
gonna go and do that,
see,
like-
my goal was always to try and work out what was happening in it, like, you know.
Yeah,
and
okay.
that's how I got into trouble later on doing inter-county stuff. So I was trying to figure out what was going on in people's heads all the time. you know.
Okay. And was this going on? I'd imagine like if you're trying to figure that out and that's your interest, being on a building site with a bunch of lads, I'm sure that's a good melting pot for it as well. You get all sorts of characters in there.
Yeah, but I was really doing the buildings for the money,
Yeah.
and I was enjoying the hard work because I grew up doing that. So like I was just doing that to get a few pounds because
Right.
there was nothing in the 80s. Like,
So what was the MBA you went on to do then when you were deciding to take the next step?
it was just a master's in business administration. That's what it was, and it was just a ticket, I suppose, to get from construction into consultancy, because in 12 months I went from being, you know, head down, arse up, chippy, to being a consultant in 12 months.
It's a big shift, yeah.
Well, anyway, it was, but I had a degree behind me and stuff like that already. So that was the shift then, you know.
Okay. And what did you start doing then? What were your first kind of jobs in that role when you left the building to
gosh,
go into that?
The title was working capital reduction, but effectively it was debt collection and stock management in companies, trying to give people back working capital out of their own businesses that was tied up in places that shouldn't have been tied up. So I did that in London for 2 or 3 years, and then did that for a year in America as well. And then decided to come back to Ireland because the kids were on the way then.
Very good. So you actually moved to the States for a year, did you?
Yeah, we had green cards and all that stuff.
Very
but
good, yeah.
I wouldn't be a fan of living in America.
What brought you over there? Was it career opportunity for yourself?
Yeah,
or
well,
your
actually,
wife, maybe?
my wife got Donnelly visas, so we both had green cards and Donnelly visas and all that stuff. So that's what.
Where did you go to over there?
Well, we moved around a lot.
Yeah.
We lived in hotels. I worked around New York, New Jersey. Did a bit of work in Florida, Tennessee, California.
Busy year, so yeah.
Yeah, and a bit up in Rochester, North New York. But look at the lifestyle. You're just living in hotels, you're living out of bag.
That's tough, yeah. No matter where you are, it's hard
no,
to settle
that's
into that lifestyle.
horrible stuff.
Yeah. And then it was back to was it your beloved Meath or?
Yeah, but back to beloved Meath. Didn't know whether I was going to go to Meath or Donegal, and sure, I was betwixt and between, and sure, kids on the way, and in the end of it, like, ended up living in a mobile home beside the home place, and
Okay, yeah.
bit of head wrecking time there. Yeah.
Yeah, how long were you there for?
I think we lived in the mobile home for about 2 years.
Okay, and you had a child at this stage as well while you were there?
I think we had 2 before we left it.
Okay, right.
Yeah.
So it's a big moment there. Like I'd say, after being travelling around the world and you've decided to move back, been in a mobile home with 2 young kids, I'd say, would it be fair to say pressure's on there, like, and you're trying to grow your career, like?
I was head melting. I started at the time working with a guy called John Butler in a thing called Century Management because I got interested in. He was selling self-development material by a guy called Brian Tracy.
I'm aware of his work, actually. Yeah,
Yeah, and like Brian Tracy is a renowned speaker and motivational speaker and all that stuff. So I was just doing anything. Like I was driving a Volkswagen Jetta that I bought off a buy of a scrapyard for 300 quid. Like,
Okay.
and the back end was falling out of it. But look, I just had no money, and that's what I was doing. And sure, I was selling this stuff for Brian Tracy's to try and get going. And at the same time, then I got a few pound off Iris's parents, and we started to build a house, and sure I started to do most of that myself.
Yeah.
Bought a bit of a site, and started to build a house, and that was about 92 or 3 or so. something like
That's
that.
between living in a mobile home, 2 young kids, trying to build your career and trying to build a house in the evening time. I imagine that's what you would call, at very least, character building years. Would that be fair to say?
Yeah. It was tough stuff, but you look at, it's great. I don't know, and I think it's very interesting. A very interesting thing about that is when you get together with somebody, and you probably found this, and other people listen to this. When you get together with somebody, you sort of get a power or a strength in the relationship that you don't normally, you wouldn't dream of doing things that you do when you get together. So, you know, I know you have 2 kids and you run the gym and you're doing all these things. And it's like when you get together and you have someone in your life that's important to you, it's just amazing what you'll do and the power you get. So anyway, it's just
working towards something that's greater than yourself.
Yeah. So look, it was a busy time.
And were you under pressure? Like, because obviously what you were trying to do, a lot of people mightn't understood that, particularly that, what we're talking early 90s, living in Meath. The word mindset probably didn't get floated around much around then.
It was nuts. It was nuts because you're trying to get people to start thinking about what was going on inside their heads and how that had impact on results or impact on how they'd improve their business or improve the morale of their people or their teamwork. And it was just before its time, really, you know. So yeah, it was nuts.
Okay, very good. So with the Brian Tracy work, the packages you were selling, like, had you seen the benefit when you were selling that? Could you see that working, or what was the next step from selling those packages? There's obviously something that's validated what you're doing, and you're trying to take the next step from there.
When I was selling those packages, like, he was all into the power of positive thinking and all that stuff, and like there was lots of good ideas about Brian Tracy, and it's a bit American, although he was a Canadian. Eventually, I sort of got enough money and out of that, and I paid off my mortgage in, say, 2 or 3 years, which was a lot of things, a lot to be done in that time.
Step,
big step in that time. But then I had no videos. I wanted to get out of the Brian Tracy stuff because it just didn't make enough sense to me. I didn't think it was honest enough. It wasn't real enough for me. And there was sort of this sense of you're just continuously selling stuff to people, to sell stuff to people. So I got out of that anyway, and I went round and I said to the people that I was working with, like, I won't have any more tapes or videos to sell you or books of Brian Tracy's to give to you. And I says, well, what do you make of that? And they said, oh, that'd be great. Will you just come in and get us talking the way you've been getting us talking and getting us discussing things and working through things? And I says, you want me to, without the Brian Tracy? Oh yeah, that'd be grand. So basically then I started to look at what really was it that I was doing that was working. And it was about really engaging people, getting people to talk among themselves, getting people to tune in to what's going on in their own head, and starting to really, really work with the picture in other people's heads. And there just was a massive need for that. I didn't even know that's the bit I was doing that was making the difference. But it was just that clarity of communication piece that was making the difference to people. And I started sort of, you could say, almost facilitating or coaching people out of nothing then.
These people you were speaking to when you said, right, this is what I'm doing now, would these have been CEOs of companies? Would they have been managers?
Yeah, they've been CEOs of companies. Like, I was working with a chap, Terence Donnelly in the North. He had I was brought into his business by somebody else, and then I realised that the person that brought me in wasn't the person that should be having a great influence. And I got to know this chap Tyrone, and sure, he was a serious businessman, and sure, he really related to the ideas. And at the time I was working with ideas from Stephen Covey at the time, and talking about the emotional bank account, if people have come across that idea. And it's a really good idea that still holds. And it's almost like this idea that if we put deposits in the emotional bank account of another person, then when we get under pressure ourselves, that we have this idea that we have the few deposits in the person's brain, so to speak, and when we need something, we can get something back. But if the emotional bank account is empty, then we have nothing to withdraw, and then the relationship gets into trouble.
Okay.
So there was stuff like that I was working with, and I was working with my old friend, the Tell-Ask Balance, about asking questions and how to listen and all that sort of stuff. So I've been working with people like that.
Can you tell us a little bit about the Tell-Ask Balance? Like, a lot of people hear that. That's probably listen to this will be the first time hearing that phrase. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, well, it's very simple. When people are having a conversation, it's normally, a social conversation is normally 50-50. And what I'm getting people to think about is that if you're leading a situation, or if you have some specialized knowledge of your own, and you want to get someone else to come to that idea or work with that idea, then what you have to be able to do is you have to find out first what actually is in their head already. And what you don't want to do is just start talking at people and telling people stuff, because what people do is that they tell people something, And they say ask the person, do you agree? And the person say, yeah. Or do you understand? They'll say, yeah. And then the person goes away and they don't actually agree or understand, even though they might have said that they did initially. So what happens then is people go away and they do stuff and it doesn't work out the way people wanted it to work out initially or thought it was going to work out. So then there's upset because of that. So what I'm suggesting to people is that people can only do what's in their own head. So if you're managing people or leading people, then you have to be able to work with the picture in the other person's head, not just the picture in your own. And to do that, you're going to have to be able to enter into an easy conversational style with people and ask them questions and find out what's in their head. So when you have the tell-ask balance going well, you spend about 80% of your time asking questions and listening to the other person. And maybe 20% of the time, you're actually talking yourself rather than the other way around.
That sounds brilliant in theory, but I'd imagine to actually practice that is quite tough, particularly with, say, a CEO who's full of ideas and wants to push his ideas onto his team. Can that be quite hard to coach with that person to get them to be quiet, to pull that information? I imagine that's a skill in itself and an art form, really, to pull that information out of someone.
Yeah, well, I sort of tend to do it with them anyway if I meet them. So then they're saying, well, yeah, your man's getting a great picture of what's going on for me. And then what you can do is you can sort of say, well, get them to give you an example of someone that's working with them. And they'd say, well, look, this and such a person is working well, that's grand. Part of what they're doing is working well, grand, that's lovely, validate that. And then you go along and say, well, this part of what they're doing isn't working well, or this person isn't working well. And you say, great. And you might say, well, what's their understanding of what they're supposed to do? And they'd say, well, I don't know. And I'd say, well, did you ask them? And they'd say, well, no. Then I'd say, well, look, the person can only do what's in their own head. So, and I'd play around with that a little bit. And they start to realise that, I'm not asking enough questions.
Okay.
And that they need to get on to do that,
So are you working with that person, that CEO or that manager one-on-one, and then they go to the team? Or is there any scenarios where you would have the whole team in together, like maybe a management team together or a board of some sort?
Yeah, well, see, normally what you have to do is you'd have to sort of work with the golden ruler or the chief executive or the person first, because what has to happen there is they have to, they have to sort of lead by example in doing this, because then if they become a better listener or a better questioner or a better leader, so leaders lead through asking questions, from my perspective, if they become better at that, then other people, the other people in the management team get a better perspective of that, and they're able to work to that, and they know it, because they've experienced it.
Very good. And how did you come across this tell-ask balance? Is this something you created yourself, or is it something that you studied and learned?
No, it's sort of just, well, I don't know. I don't think anyone ever wrote about it before me, but I just realised that, people can only do what's in their own head. Like, I remember growing up with our fella, and our fella would say to you, I've told you 5 something times, I've told you 5 times how to do that, and and you still haven't done it right. And then I realised, then I came across a bit of a thing somewhere that when people hear something, they can only remember 20% of it if they're listening. So you have to actually tell them 5 times for them to get. But then what happens, obviously, then if someone is coming at you aggressively, the bones in your middle ear change and you can't actually hear what people are saying if they're coming at you with too much tension. So what actually happens is you can't bloody hear it. So instead of working with the picture in your own head, if you're a manager or a boss, you need to learn and get better at working with the picture in the other person's head. So that's just where it came from.
So would a good manager or a good leader have to be skilled in asking good questions? Is that a vital part of it, do you think?
Well, I think so.
Yeah,
I think so. Because I've just seen that with all the different people I've worked with over the time. It's like, no matter who I've worked with, and there's guys that I've worked with that sold a business for 150 million, and there's guys that, have 2 or 3 people, and there's guys that have worked with management football teams, and every one of them that I've ever worked with pick up on that idea. That they're not working well enough with the picture in other people's heads. They're just not. They're not listening. Because, as you said, They have their own knowledge, they have their own experience, they have their own picture of what should happen, and they're so driven to try and get that across, is that they don't stop to think what is it that's going on for the other person. And like, I was very taken as well when I looked at this thing. I looked up, education, but I tried to suss out what education was. And education, because I'd been in school for quite a while, and I'm a tick, whatever, but I've been in school for quite a while, and my experience of education was that you sit there and people tell you this and tell you that, and they put this across you. But when I looked up education, the Latin for it seemingly comes from something like to draw forth from within. So education is supposed to be about drawing out, not putting in. And I had no experience of that. As a student, it was more everyone telling me what to do. So that sort of couples itself with the Telas balance, and the Socratic method. Although Socrates, is the guy that's supposed to start all that, but he was trying to get people to come up with stuff themselves. So I put that sort of idea together, and people found it very useful in sport and in business and all sorts of places.
Well, I can personally vouch for it because we've done some coaching over the years and it's had a massive impact on me. I suppose, to use my example with running the gym and the Bulletproof Dad program, often guys will be looking for tips on training or nutrition, and the natural thing to do is to give them your knowledge and tell them what they should do, give them their plan. But it doesn't always work out for everybody for abundance of reasons. So you mentioned there that human beings, they tend to only absorb roughly 20% of what they're told. Why
if they're listening.
If they're listening, which is a big if. Yeah. And why do you think that is? Is it something that way our minds are programmed? Is it something to do with our brain? Or how is that the case that we can only absorb so little?
Well, see, we can absorb an awful lot. We can nearly absorb 100% of someone is saying if we're in the right place in our head. But we often aren't, because we think we already know. So we have our friend, our ego, to deal with. So our ego is there to sort of protect us and keep us going. And it's not a bad thing at all. And we need to have a sufficiently strong ego. But when we have created a situation where we feel we don't know, then our ego sort of becomes weak and we become humble. So then we're in a position to take on new information. So if you're a leader and you're using something like the Telas balance, this is what we're talking about here, what you need to be able to do is engage a person, find out what they're doing, find out what they're doing well, validate that.
Why is that important to validate that?
Well, because it gives them a sense of status, a sense of control, and it makes them feel good about themselves. And it strengthens their ego. It actually strengthens their ego to validate them, because if you don't validate them, then their ego is being defensive and it has to fight you. So when you validate what the person is doing well, then you can ask a few more questions to get them to realize that what they're doing is working well, but it's not what it could be, or they're not operating from where they could be, or what they're doing at the moment isn't going to actually really take them to where they want to go. But once they feel validated, they feel strong, and then they can relax. And so that means that their emotional brain or their amygdala can relax, and then they can take a bit of headspace, they can take a bit of privacy. And then what that means then is they say, right, if you can then ask them the right question, right, you're sort of getting them into the position of curiosity. And then with the curiosity, they say, gosh, is there a bigger pattern? Is there more I could know here? Is there more I could understand? And that activates the appetite or the need for learning in them. So by creating the conditions through engaging them with the Telas balance, and by validating their lower needs as we talk about them, or validating their ego, we create the conditions for the person to be able to learn. And if we don't learn, we can't change. And if we don't change what we're doing, we can't get better results. So the whole bit sort of fits together, but it's very practical that we need to understand how the heads work. Because normally what people are trying to do is change people's thinking. But underneath the thinking level, people experience emotions. And underneath emotions, people experience feelings. And the feelings are really old memories of how their needs were met growing up. And so if people have old uncomfortable memories, which cause strong emotional reactions in them, like, and have fear or anger coming up when things are going along, then those strong emotions, they sort of like crowd out the more subtle emotions of curiosity, creativity, questioning, learning, right? So we have to be able to manufacture almost the conditions in the other person's head to get them to move from crude emotions to more, I don't know, nurturing emotions so they can learn. And that's the job of the leader, to be able to create the conditions for people to learn.
That's fascinating. And I think, would it be a fair summary to say you're trying to get them out of, say, their primitive part of their brain into their more human part, the advanced part of their brain?
Yeah. The primitive part of the brain is the limbic system, or the ape brain, and in there there's our old friend, the amygdala.
I was just going to ask you about that. Could you, because people would have heard that word 2 or 3 minutes ago and probably going, what the hell is an amygdala? So could you give us a little bit on that?
Okay, well, look, at the way we're wired is this: we have an old brain in it, which is an emotional brain, and everything that comes through our senses has to go to a part of our brain called the thalamus first, which is almost like a relay station, and then next to the thalamus is the amygdala, and the amygdala really is the security guard, right? The security guard, it does what a bouncer does on the door. It lets people in, it throws people out, it does whatever it does.
We've all had that experience growing up, yeah.
Well, yeah, being the bouncer or being bounced.
Both.
Okay. So anyway, the way the security guard works, or the amygdala works, when it's fully triggered, it has only 3 modes it can work on, which is fight, flight, or freeze. And when these modes are triggered, then the emotional brain, it more or less says, okay, I'm in charge here. And the emotional brain is the limbic brain. It's an old piece of kit that's in everybody. It's a survival instinct. But above that is the neocortex, or the thinking brain. And so the thinking brain has different functions like logic, creativity, imagination, and has this frontal part, this prefrontal cortex, that allows us to think contextually. Now, the problem with the emotional brain is that it doesn't want a big, long analysis of what's going on. It needs a quick and dirty answer if it feels it's threatened. So it switches off the frontal cortex.
Okay.
It switches off the ability to think contextually, which is the functional part that allows us to access our higher intelligence as human beings. So, and that's a survival instinct. But this is getting triggered by stuff that's coming in that doesn't really necessitate a full emotional hijack, right? And this is the thing that plagues people in sports, or plagues people in business, trying to get teams working together. It plagues us in our own personal relationships, because what's happening is we've been triggered by old stuff, and it's damaging our ability to connect to the people that we care most about. So this stuff is happening, and what I just simply do is I spell it out really straightforward to people, and I give people more or less a toolbox. Like going back to the construction thing, you had the tools, you had a hammer, you had a chisel, you had a saw, east wing hammer, lump hammer mostly. But yeah, whatever tool you had, you used it. So I give people a toolbox to be able to understand how their heads work. You know, and it's very simple. You just sit down with someone, you ask them how their head works, and they say, I have no fucking clue. I don't
That's probably
know.
the answer you get every single
I
time.
don't know. And let's have a look at, okay, so let's say people say or do things or they perform in a certain way, and say, well, what happens then before that happens? And sure, you probe or you push people a little bit and say, well, you probably think, do you? And it's great, you think, yeah, wonderful. Now, there's different qualities to thinking, right? Like we have this imagination that's all very good at coming up with creative solutions, but the imagination running the wrong way brings us into anxiety, worry, and stress. And that causes depression, as we all know. So we have this bloody brain, and no one is teaching anybody how it works in really simple terms. So, okay, so we have what we say and do that leads to our results. Below that, we have thinking, and there's different qualities of that. Now, what happens before you think? People say, they don't know. They haven't a clue. And I say, it's nothing to do with emotions, is it? I say, well done. It's bloody emotions, isn't it? And then I'll say, emotions then fuel. The quality of your emotions fuel the quality of your thinking. And they'll say, how do you mean? I said, well, look, think of a time when you were upset or angry or frustrated or whatever. Yeah. What was going on for you? I was experiencing emotion. I was experiencing fear or anxiety. Huh? And what was the quality of your thinking at that time? And they said, it was, yeah, you know yourself what it was.
See red.
Yeah, to see red, or I was anxious, I was worried, or dark mist, or red mist, or fog. Or, yeah, grand. Okay. So that's just words for saying your thinking wasn't clear. So now people are saying, right, so there is emotions. Everybody has them. There's nothing special about them. And, you know, nothing too precious about them. But the quality of our emotion fuels the quality of our thinking. So here now we're starting to see a system for accessing intelligence availability. Now, below the emotions, of course, are the feeling memories of how our needs were met from an early point of our life. So basically, a simple example of this is, say you had a fairly controlling parent or teacher or something, and that was your definition of an authority figure. Well, in time, let's say you got promoted, there could be a tendency then in that person to say, well, here's my moment to shine. I'm now going to lead or command or manage the way I was managed when I was a kid. And you have this command and control manager or leader, and they don't actually know where that's coming from or why they're doing it. But they're getting results, but it's at the expense of teamwork or flexibility of thought or the greater stuff. So everyone is somewhere in this. And all I simply do is give people an understanding of it and give them tools to work with it.
We mentioned at the start there about you starting all this journey in the 90s where this sort of stuff was never really spoken about. It seems, in my opinion, it seems to be getting a lot more progressive as years have come on and people are becoming more, there's a lot more awareness to stress, depression, which is great. And it's people are now starting to ask these sort of questions. Just to bring it back to what you're saying there, I think there's a lot of people who could be listening to this who are probably in a management level who are exactly what you've just mentioned there in terms of been brought up in a strict manner. A lot of our parents, for example, would have grown up in a heavily Catholic Ireland with that sort of culture was in play across the board. Like I know my own father grew up in a small town in Tipperary, and going to mass on a Sunday, the priest stood up and read out what every family gave the church that week. So you can imagine this. But you can imagine, like, we imagine what the fear of that sitting in your own town and what that brought on everybody. And that has a trickle effect. So my father grew up in that environment. He's then trying to raise me. So again, there's a knock-on effect to me. And like, again, it gets passed from generation to generation in some form. I think, can you see it now? Maybe a lot of people who are maybe in the height of their career, maybe in their 40s or 50s in terms of an age bracket, who are leading big teams, but are potentially just falling into that dictator leader as opposed because it was passed on to them. Is that a lot of the work you would do now? Maybe is probably the best question to ask.
Yeah, but see, we all have a sort of a spectrum of this. You know, we have a bit of this and we have a bit of that, and sometimes we get triggered by this, or sometimes we don't. You know, there's all sorts of things goes on, and like no one is any one thing. But the thing that we can do now is we can give people a set of tools that they can look at themselves to see, okay, well, just hold on a second. My thinking wasn't good there. What was going on? Well, I was actually, and I get people to name their emotions. See, if you name your emotion, you say, look, if I am so look, it's fairly straightforward. There's 3 uncomfortable emotions that we all experience. So there's fear and there's anger. And underneath that is usually grief, coming from rejection or abandonment or some stuff. Now, people say this all goes back to your childhood and all this stuff. You can't be blaming your childhood for everything. And no one's blaming anyone for anything here. We're just trying to bloody understand it. Yeah. So what most people that are getting into any sort of trouble, they can identify with a bit of help that there's a bit of anxiety or fear going on, or there's a bit of anger or frustration going on. So they're experiencing uncomfortable emotion. That uncomfortable emotion is partially switching off their frontal cortex, right? And it's stopping their ability to see the bigger context and make high quality decision making. This costs a fortune, absolute cost a fortune. You could have someone on your payroll, 50, 60, 70, 80, 100, 200,000. And if they're not able to combine contextual thinking with all the skills, knowledge and experience they have, then they can make decisions that work for all the stakeholders, and they find it difficult to get to what I call team intelligence. So this piece of information is really, really valuable because it improves the quality of thinking that a group of people can get to. But it takes a person to have their own personal insight to do it. And no one can do it for the person. You just give them the tools and they start to do it themselves based on how much their appetite is to look at this stuff on themselves.
No, I think that's a great summary and just gives people an understanding of what's going on in that melting pot of our brain of ours.
Yeah, but it's simple and straightforward and it's simple tools to look at. It's not a mysterious black box anymore.
Yeah. So that's how you're working in the business world. How do you then get involved in the sports and particularly the GAA world? How did that step kind of happen for you?
Well, it primarily happened because I had a lot of unmet expectations myself, because I wasn't good enough at it myself. My head was a mess when I was at it. And I always thought, I need to get a bit of status in sport, because the brothers had played a bit of county and John, the brother, had Captain Mead when they won the Junior All-Ireland and stuff like that. But I had a little bit of unfinished business in that area.
I know that feeling.
So that left me vulnerable. And then, I started working, first of all, with a fella called Tony Brady, a local chap that was working with the Cavan miners. And I'll just tell you how deadly this is. We were playing a game and we had a guy in goals, and I forget the chap's name now, let's call him Mick. But anyway, and we're in the dressing room and Tony says to everyone, he says, "Now, Mick, I want you to come for Everton," right? Just in a sort of a moment of, a bit of a pep talk moment, come for Everton. And I looked at a chap that was working with us then, Paul O'Dowd, and I looked at Tony, and Tony was just in the trance, like he just couldn't see it. And we went out to bloody play the match anyway, and sure, Mick came for this ball when the goalie coach had all the time saying to him, "Stay in your line, stay in your bloody line, stay in your line, let the full back and test the ball, and you go for the break of it behind." Anyway, as you know what happened, Mick went for the ball, someone flicked it on, they got a goal, we lost the match. And it was just this moment of just unknowing emotional chat, geeing guys up for a match, but it cost us the match in a way. So that was my first start. But then when I mentioned Terence Donnelly earlier, I was doing work with Terence, and a chap called Peter Canavan, people might have heard of him, was getting the car from Terence, and he was asking how the whole thing was coming up. It was coming up to the Ireland final in 2003.
So Peter Canavan was the captain of Tyrone seniors at the time.
Yeah,
really good footballer.
Yeah, quite a good footballer, talented bloke. And so Terence mentioned me to Peter, and then Peter mentioned me to Mickey. And then I met Mickey up at Ballygally Roundabout, and we went to Kelly's Inn for a chat.
And again, just before we move on, Mickey is Mickey Harte, the Tyrone manager at the time.
Yeah,
a very successful manager as well.
Yeah, so I met Mickey anyway, and sure, I can talk a little bit about this one because Mickey wrote in his book. Thanks for that, Mick. And I says to Mickey after a while, says, "Mickey, what are you trying to do here?" And he says, in all sincerity, as Mickey would, he'd look you straight in the eyes and he'd just be straight and he'd look at you and he'd say, "Look, I want to develop the thinking player." And I says to him, "Right," says I, using the old tell last balance, I says to him, "How are you doing that?" He says, "I'm telling them to think." And I says, "Yes, I have you here, boy." Yeah. Right? And I says, "Is that working?" He says, "No, it's not bloody working." I says, "Right." So then I asked him, "How's the conversation going?" And he says, "This conversation here." I says, "It's great, it's very interesting." I says, "What are we talking about?" "We're talking about this, we're talking about that." "How you find it?" "Oh, it's very creative, it's very interesting." And I says, "Why is this conversation happening the way it's happening?" And he says, "Well, we're just having a chat." And I says, "Yeah, but who's leading the conversation?" He says, "I suppose you are." I says, "Yeah." He says, "What am I doing to lead the conversation?" And he said, "Well, we're just having a chat, like we're talking about this now." "Yeah, but Mickey, come on, I'm doing something. What am I doing?" Because I didn't want to give it to him easy. I want him to earn this bloody piece of knowledge, you know what I mean? And I like torturing people just a little bit because I was tortured a lot growing up, so why not? So here we go. And I said, "What am I doing?" I said, "Mickey, what do you work at?" He says, "I'm a teacher." "What do you teach?" "English." I said, "Mickey, what am I doing here?" "You're constructing sentences," he says, "and you're putting them to me." I said, "But what sort of sentences am I putting to you?" He says, "You keep on asking me questions." I says, "Great, Mickey. Now, what am I doing?" "You're asking me questions." "Now, Mickey, say it 3 times. I want to ask you 3 times. What am I doing?" So I got him to repeat back 3 times.
He was ready to hit you at this stage, was he?
Yeah, he was ready to hit me at this stage. But I think with a lot of these GAA boys, like, and Dan's out there listening, you know, they're like this. They're thick. You have to bay it into them, right? Or bay it out of them, you know. Right. So you have to get the penny to drop. I said, so Mickey, what am I doing to get you thinking? He's Bart, you're asking me questions. Mickey, what are you trying to do? Oh, I'm trying to develop the thinking player. So Mickey, what do you need to start to do? He said, oh, fuck. I need to start asking more questions, don't I? I said, that's right, Mickey. And that is sometimes what you have to do to get the guys to realise that they have to start asking more questions and to work with the picture in the other person's head. Right? So that's where it started with Mickey.
It's fascinating. Like, again, it's so obvious when you spell it out like that, but if you think of that, you just mentioned that melting pot of the dressing room where the manager have to motivate these boys, have to get them. And when you get into that sort of animated state, you're not thinking clearly.
But you're in a trance. You're in a trance. You're in a communication trance. You're putting this message across, and it's also important. And like, a lot of the time, these players actually aren't listening to you because they're so concerned about what's going on in themselves. And what you have to do is you have to create the conditions that the players are actually telling you what it is they're going to be doing when they're playing well, rather than you telling them. And this makes a massive change. This makes a massive, massive change.
So that was Tyrone. How many years did you work with Mickey Harte then? Because they had a very successful spell for a couple of years there.
3, 4, 5, sort of 6. I wasn't there any longer. Then I think you won another All-Ireland in 8 or something.
Yeah. So you were. There was a couple of All-Irelands in that time you were there. Was there?
Yeah, 2. Yeah.
And that was their first in a long time.
A long time. Yeah.
Yeah. So that was obviously had a massive impact. So like a huge validation for the work that's been done there.
Yeah. But like, so Mickey Harte is a serious teacher himself anyway. And like people say, why does he work with Loud now? And I'd say probably because he just loves teaching.
Yeah.
He just loves it. He just wants a group of people that'll learn, and that's one of the big things about the show.
But you can see the clash. You mentioned it earlier. When we're taught in school, we're told.
Oh, yeah.
So if that's what, like, again, it was his job on a day-to-day basis, and then it's the logical thing to do when you go into a dressing room. So you can see how it happens.
But there's so many intelligent, creative people getting stuck in this bloody one-way communication. And then, so there's the telling part or the asking part, and then you have to know how to listen. Now, knowing how to listen is a whole other skill set, but we'll not just go into it here, but there's more to listening is the critical piece, because it's how you listen and how you structure and sequence subsequent questions. That's really what's required to unlock this capability or potential that people have, just to bring them to their own intelligence, really.
It's fascinating. So you've now built a bit of a name for yourself, would it be fair to say, in the GAA world. From the work you've done, well, you've helped Tyrone, you've been a part of it. You played a role in that process of them becoming All-Ireland champions a couple of times for the first time in a very long time. Or were they your first ever All-Irelands, or had they won it going back?
Oh no, they hadn't won it before.
So they'd never won an All-Ireland.
Yeah, I don't think they had. Like, I'm not good on the left neocortex stuff. So
apologies to any Tyrone fans if there was one back in the day.
They hadn't. So
that's huge.
The first, I think it was the first,
when does the call come from? The reason I'm asking this is because you're sitting in a studio here with 2 massive Dublin GAA fans. So when do you get the call that we hear here from Bernard Brogan's passage at the start when Pat Gilroy gets in touch? What's the story there?
There's an interesting thing that myself and Mickey Harte worked out a number of years ago, and I'd come up to that question very quickly then. We had a major argument about a year into our crack, myself and Harte. Not an argument, just a heated debate. Do we get players to talk about what they're doing wrong? Or do we just get people to really focus on what playing well looks like? So this went on for a while. And eventually then we settled that we had no time to get people to start looking at the bad stuff. So we really got people really, really focusing all the time on what working well looks like. And that's what the video clips were all about. And I met Harte one morning, and he had 2 big black eyes under him and on him. And I says, "What's wrong with you?" He said, "I'm exhausted." I said, "What are you doing?" "Fucking up all night watching video." I says, "Right." And I says, "Can the boys not watch television?" Because he was actually watching the video and interpreting for the boys. So what we started doing was getting video clips. I know this sounds crazy now, but we started getting video clips for the guys of what they did when they played well, give it to the guys, and then get the guys to tell us what they were doing when they were playing well, rather than us telling them.
Yeah.
So then the guys are programming themselves into visualization, verbalization, affirmation, all this psychobabble stuff was all happening just because you get the boys to watch the video themselves and tell you what they were doing when they were playing well. How did that move happen? What was that part of the play? But one of the bits in passing was we learned with Mickey how to control centre field. And it's important to the story of how I eventually got in with Mr. Gilroy, because after Mickey, I was working with a boy, James Sullivan, down in Kerry, and he was a neighbour of Jack O'Connor's. Mm-hmm. And he won an intermediate All-Ireland pretty much by learning, getting the boys to make contact tackles and upping the intensity and controlling centre field and a few things. But anyway, so I met Jack for a while in the run-up to that. Dublin match where they got hammered.
So you're on the Kerry side of this game in 2009. All right.
Yeah. And like Dublin were just, Cork were the big enemy that time. Dublin were just incidental stuff to hit the window screen sort of thing in a way. Because Dublin and a lot of teams back then would have based an awful lot on having a few key people in the middle of the field that would win centre field. And I had no interest in a person winning centre field, because it put an awful lot of pressure on the individual and it left them very vulnerable. So instead of that, what we would do is we get people to control centre field, which is very much go up, break the ball, make control contact in the ball, tap it down, get someone else to win the break and do all that. So
control centre field is different to winning centre field.
Well, see, winning centre field puts an awful lot of pressure on an individual back then to go up and win a clean ball.
That's what my image would be of it, yeah. A big high catch, yeah.
But that's it, yeah.
It looks glorious when it works, yeah.
And sure, some of these people then would make these nice long runs to catch this ball and whatever. And sure, then they can be so easily interfered with by like fellas like Brian Dewar back then. It was crazy. And there was a good colleague of mine, or a good county man of mine, that back then that says that Brian Dewar played county puke football, all right? And that he'd never make a footballer and all that stuff. Well, puke was someone from Kerry, but that Brian Dewar never make a footballer. That was a Mead man.
We're talking about there, yeah.
This Mead man said he'd never make a footballer. But Brian Dewar's role in controlling centre field was critical in those matches. And he went on to be a brilliant footballer anyway. But and captain and manager.
So he was a disruptor in that.
Well, it's just what you do if someone was needing 5 or 6 or 7 big long strides to go and launch themselves to win a ball. All you do is just give them a wee nudge, knock them off, go in, someone else tap the ball down, and Brian Dewar go in and win this break. And people say, Jesus, how is he getting them balls? But no one was actually looking at it through the lens of how do you control it. So I used to spend 3 hours watching a match, but you had an old video cassette, and you just look at it frame by frame by frame by frame and say, what is it that's working well here? Anal stuff. But I didn't know anything about football, really. And I was up there rubbing shoulders with Mickey Harte and Jack O'Connor and these boys. But how the fuck do you know that, like? And it was just attention to detail. It's called magnification in psychology when you look at something really slowly. But anyway, so along the way anyway, I was working with Jack that year, and Cork was the one to beat, and we outperformed them. But Dublin were a consequence on that journey. And Pat was over Dublin at that time.
That was Pat's first year, and that was it 17-point defeat in the end?
Something like that.
Yeah,
it was something big.
Heavy defeat. Yeah.
It was heavy. Yeah. It was heavy, but it meant nothing because it just they weren't even on the radar. Yeah. Cork were the ones that's on the radar. So anyway,
it meant a lot in Dublin, though.
Oh, well, it did. But look, better things would have come for Dublin. So anyway, the question was, I got a call from Pat. Pat would have asked me, what happened there? What do you think happened against whatever? He says, I've been talking to 7 or 8 different people and no one's really helped me to understand it. And I asked him, do you want to know what Kerry were at, or do you want to know what happened? He said, know what happened in their heads. So I explained the crack about the amygdala and the emotional hijacking and the security guard. And sure, he says, yeah. Anyway, he was very interested in this. And, he sort of says, well, where do you think the biggest opportunity lies here? And I said, I'm probably talking to it. So as a meeting man, you want to give a double man a belt, which I never...
Every chance you get.
Every chance you get. So we did. And then, in fairness, his next question was, when can I meet you? And I met him in the City North Hotel. And then we worked together for 3 years in a crazy close relationship to bring stuff around.
And in your second year working with him, Dublin were All-Ireland champions, weren't they?
Yeah.
So I was a proud me man watching, because that game against Kerry, that All-Ireland final, that was something that I just want to get to now, because it's actually another little passage from the book I was just quoted at the start.
Oh,
if it's
right,
okay to mention this, and we might just, because I think it's a good summary of what we're talking about.
Yeah, we're going to mention it. Go on.
So Bernard Brogan's then, it's again going back to his autobiography, just because it's the same passage. So he's talking about going into that final against Kerry 2 years later. So this is 2 years after the big heavy defeat, 17-point defeat against Kerry, and you've come on the scene working with Pat. So this is, we've spoke about that at the start.
Those 2 years.
2 years, yeah. So he says, before we boarded the bus to head to Croker on All-Ireland Final Day 2011, the game we're talking about, Pat presented us with a couple of stats. The first was our tackle count from the night we first played Monaghan in the shit and rain in a pre-season friendly in Inniskeen. So I think that was part of the process, booking these friendlies early on to kind of toughen up the lads maybe.
Yeah.
It was double. The tackle count was double what it had been in the startled Earwigs game, which is that heavy defeat against Kerry in 2009 we're talking about. So they already doubled their tackle count in that. But then he goes on to say, our tackle count against Donegal, which I think was the All-Ireland semi-final before going into the final against Kerry, was 120, which again was more than double that we put in. So going off those numbers, there was obviously maybe 30-odd tackles made against Kerry in 2009. And he's saying there, up to 120 tackles made in that semi-final against Donegal. This is in the space of 2 years. He didn't have to say any more. We were a different animal to the one that Kerry had last seen in the championship. We were ready to hunt and chase them to the death. That's a big change in attitude in 2 years.
Yeah, it's brilliant. It's brilliant. I didn't actually see that bit in the book, but look, it's brilliant. But see, if we go back to the story about the amygdala earlier on, right, and what happened, and Pat's question to me was what happened, and the question I said to him was, and he made the comment about startled earwigs, but my suggestion of how you explain that is really about the person got emotionally hijacked, right? So that the frontal cortex and the logical brain, the left neocortex, is actually shut down, effectively shut down by endorphins coming up from the security guard or the amygdala. Now, and that means any plan or game plan or a higher part of play that you might have practiced is fucking gone out the window.
That's because you're getting hammered in a stadium of 80,000 people watching you. The atmosphere is turned.
Yeah,
is it fear or grief or
it's
anger?
Fear. It's fear. It's pure fucking fear. Because it's fight or flight. Now, if you can get the players to stay in fight mode, then they'll come through it. But if they go into fear, or if they start going into freeze mode, which is bloody worse, right? They start to freeze and get heavy-legged. And they're getting, so it's fight, flight, or freeze. So, and when you go into freeze mode, you're actually in a deep REM state. So it's almost like a stage of dreaming. You're in a bloody trance. You don't know what's going on. You know what I mean? It's almost like waiting to die, sort of thing. So it's horrible. It's a horrible thing. So, well, we would have started out very, very quickly. And Bernard, writing his book, he didn't know how much this was and how important it was to him where he got to. But the first thing that we started to do, the first stat and only stat we mentioned, we decided we'd measure when we got together, Pat and I, was bloody tackle count and contact tackle count. Now, back then you could tackle more than you can tackle now, but contact tackles was the one and only key indicator for actually getting on the bloody team and getting a jersey.
Why did you choose that stat?
Why did you do that? Because the full forward line for a start had to learn to bloody work when they had the ball. Rather than meet glory men inside waving their hands. So, and then everyone had to get work rate. Now, the other thing about that, I know it's horrible for forwards to say you have to work. It's now common. It's done, changed. It's common. It's just the end of the story. The soccer guys are even doing it. Liverpool are doing it. Everyone's fucking at it. Right? But the other thing about it is this, is that if you have the measure or the stat or the performance indicator, now I have to go in and make a certain quality contact tackle, it puts the player into fight mode because I'm going to do something. I'm going to make contact. I'm not going to sit back. I'm not going to run. I'm going to do something. So it puts the security guard, the bouncer at the door, he brings them on side for you. So that's the critical thing about contact tackling. It does that. The other thing it does is it disrupts the other opposition's part of the play, right? And what it does as well is if you're getting 120 contact tackles, right, in 60 minutes or whatever it is, minutes of football, 70 minutes of football, or 80 minutes of football, and the ball is out of play half the time. Like, what's happening is the opposition's brain is getting bombarded. Their security guard is getting bombarded with physical contact, which is totally disrupting the game. So it totally changed. And this is the whole thing about work rate. That's what was so critical behind it all, right? And very much with Mickey Harte and all of that stuff, and that whole Tyrone piece. The contact tackle had a massive psychological benefit for the team that were doing it, and it was against the team that weren't bloody doing it.
You put your own team into fight mode, and by default put the other team into freeze or fear mode.
Thank you.
Boom.
Perfect.
It's as simple as that.
Why did you just say that half an hour ago? We stopped all this time. Yeah.
And come here, most important question. As a proud Meath man, did you celebrate when Stephen Cluxton kicked that ball over the bar and Dublin won the All-Ireland?
I was bloody delighted.
Were you?
Yeah,
Great.
bloody
Good to
delighted.
hear.
Because there was 2 massive years of work put into that.
Yeah,
it was
huge.
crazy. It was crazy. And, in fairness to Pat Gilroy, like a massive bloody student. Massive student. Now, I know he was well humbled by Kerry, but humility is a key part of everything in this. But, like, never mind that. But the appetite to learn and understand and know and to bring a difference, it takes great courage.
And by the time he reached out to, like, he's obviously a man on top of his game. He was running his own business, doing very well, and he's the inter-county manager, like, of his county. So he obviously has a lot going for him already to get to that position.
That's right.
So it says a lot about him to be, as you said, Kerry probably helped to be humble enough to then take someone on board and actually listen and apply.
Yeah, but I find this with a lot of people. There's certain people who have an appetite it's an appetite for learning, an appetite to want to be part of something greater than themselves. And it's not in everybody. Or it's not turned on in everybody. But I think we all have it. And I think human beings need to tune more into this on a bigger scale at the moment, is that there's something bigger we need to be doing, rather than just trying to live in fancy houses or fancy cars or whatever it is. But that to be able to get people to nurture the appetite in people to actually want to learn and really understand this, it was very easy with Pat Gilroy. Okay. And, I don't want to take an at all from Jim and what he did, because it was fantastic to watch Dublin go on and do everything they did. But I do feel that Pat would have turned the ship a little bit and got to go in a different direction.
Absolutely, like what Pat inherited when he first came in versus what Jim inherited are 2 completely different animals, like, definitely. Yeah, like, I think even now you see, this is, again, the Bernard Brogan's book we're quoting here is a good example. A lot of players big players of Dublin with a lot of All-Ireland medals have retired in the last few years. We've had one here a couple of weeks back in Paul Flynn, and they all speak so highly of Pat Gilroy, and they all talk about this kind of key period. It comes up. Again, when we spoke to Paul Flynn, I asked him what his biggest thing was. It was tackle counts. That's what he said. So again, it's no surprise people who've listened to that podcast will be listening to you now going, oh, that's where that came from. And you can see the combination of both. Absolutely fascinating stuff. So just to bring it back to where you're at now, Bart, just give us a little bit of an idea of the work you're doing at the moment. Is it mostly with business people? Are you still involved in the GA world, or where are you at the moment?
I'm not really, thank God, I'm not working with anyone in GA at the moment, because you just really need to have the right person. It takes an awful lot of energy and everything. But anyway, if the right person did come along, you're always tempted, because it's fascinating to be part of team intelligence. There was a thing called COVID there a couple of years ago. You might have heard of it. It totally flattened what I was doing, because I was working with people in business and groups and leadership teams and all that stuff, and that was all out the door. And then I was working with a chap called Joe Griffin, and Joe was the founder of the Human Givens Project, and a genius at what he does, and fantastic psychologist who I've trained with and became a psychotherapist with him. But I don't really keep that up, but I was only there for the skills and the knowledge in the first place. So then all of that sort of stopped, and then I've had to rebuild myself since COVID, and Jim and Joe sort of leaving the business, or me leaving the business with Joe, because it just died. That whole thing died. So what I'm doing now is I'm sort of working with people in business, trying to get people to be their best in business or in life. But ultimately, it's about creating the conditions for people to be able to access their own intelligence, because I think that's what's been happening all along. I've been fascinated about, is there better ways to do stuff? Can there be people saying, no, you can't do this, you can't do that? I say, fuck you, come on. And that was a great thing with Mickey Harte. You said to Mickey Harte you couldn't do it. He'd say, that's great, let me show you we can.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah.
like and all of these people that operate at this level, they don't really hear no. And no is sort of a motivator. So what I'm doing with people in business now is to really more systemize this idea about intelligence availability. And people want business intelligence or organizational intelligence, but to have that, that's like, what's behind that is really about having a living strategy in your business. That you have a strategy. Everyone has a great strategy in the business, but how do you actually get that living and getting people taking ownership of it? So there's a whole system that can go behind that. You don't get that unless you have team intelligence. And team intelligence, you only actually know team intelligence when you've experienced it. And this is the fascinating thing about the GAA. You know, winning a couple of things myself as a young guy, you have the bug, like that buzz of being part of team intelligence. There's nothing to replace it. There's just nothing to do it. And that then comes back to people being able to access their own individual intelligence, which is about, you know, being able to tune into what's going on in your own head and manage it, like some of the stuff we talked about earlier. So ultimately, I see that's sort of where people are most interested in, or you can add value to people the most, is in this area of just helping people or getting people to see the tools or develop the tools in themselves of being able to access intelligence at whatever level they need to do it. So
And it can have an impact on all areas of your life, not just business, really, can't it?
Yeah. Well, the big business is at home. You know, that's at home, the family, you know, the quality of relationships we have with the people that we care the most about. So that's what it's all about.
Yeah.
But you sort of, you teach them a little bit in the business world or the team world, and then they bring it home themselves. So that's the way it works.
Okay, great, yeah. And if I was, say, someone involved in business or someone that wanted to kind of find out a little bit more about this, maybe their mind has just been blown having listened to this podcast, what's the best way for them to reach out to you?
I don't know, send me an email, I suppose.
And what's the email address for that?
Bart@bobib, BOBIB.
What does that stand for?
Stands for being our best in business.
Okay.
I just had to get a name somewhere.
Yeah.
It's so hard to get names on the internet now, so I just made it up. But that's really, it's a bit about that. It's about, like, everybody wants to be our best. And it's not about being my best in business, because I don't think there is a my best. A my best isn't real. It's only our best, because we are a social species and we're only best when we're part of a group. So we delude ourselves if we think that we're good individuals. We're not.
Okay.
So it's being our best in business.
Okay, fascinating stuff. Bart, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you on today. All right. Thank you so much for your time. I know a lot of people will take massive value from this. So thank you so much for your time today.
I hope it's useful.